The Biden Justice Department is warning states against creating legislation blocking transgender care for minors. The DOJ warns that the states risk action by the federal government, including losing federal funding for state programs. And my friends, when I say civil war is coming, or that we're in some kind of civil war and people doubt it, I need only point to things like this. This is not a moral statement on what the DOJ is doing. I'm sure you have your opinions. My point is just that certainly the right will not be okay with what the Biden DOJ is doing, and certainly people on the left will support it. Certainly people on the right are not okay with teachers having secret sexual conversations with children ages 4 through 9, and the left demands they have a right to do it. Now, we have this thread that's going viral that breaks down why it is teachers are trying to have these conversations in secret. It's very interesting. Josh Dawes on Twitter says, just trying to help, is his Twitter handle, host of the Great Awakening podcast, breaks down how what's really happening in schools is that teachers are trying to sever the bonds between parents and child. It's very easy to do. It's kind of scary how easy it is to do. It's one of the reasons I've often said you need to stand up for yourself, for your friends and your family, even if it means you lose your job. Because as I've stated before, while you are at work, making sure that you keep your job and they beat you over the head with woke die cultism, your children are in the hands of these people. And this thread's actually really fascinating because Josh goes through how even well-intentioned teachers don't realize they're pushing this agenda. I don't think every single teacher has this agenda. I think there is an agenda among certain individuals that makes sense to some people, and it's being exploited. Or I should say human empathy is being exploited. Basically what happens is in the thread, and we'll get to it, is that kids are depressed for some reason or another. The school will then tell them, here's your solution to your depression, but don't tell your parents. This allows them time to sever the bonds between the student and the parents, so that finally when the parents find out and they say, hey, this is bad for you, the kid says, you're hurting me. You're going against everything I've been doing. And then they take your kids from you. We'll get into that. A lot of crazy stories. One story I read about someone who said that when they realized this was happening, they just very calmly and politely said, hey, I'm moving for a new job and thank you for everything you've done for my child. And then as soon as they moved out, they separated their kid from all of the stuff from the internet. And then what ends up happening is the kid reverts to normal, like a normal average child. We'll take a look at what's happening with the DOJ. This goes also all the way up to the Biden administration. Of course, with the Parental Rights and Education bill, the left has been screaming, it's don't say gay. They've tried equating the idea of groomers. For some reason, the left is doing this. They're equating groomers with trans people and queer people. Now, here's the fascinating thing. When it comes to what's happening in Florida, I said, you could have spoken up. Now your kids are in the hands of pedophiles for 8 hours. And I had a bunch of people be like, why are you equating trans people and queer people with pedophiles? And I was like, I didn't even say trans or queer at all. I said pedophiles. They're groomers. They are people who are exploiting all of this to get access to your kids. Why did you assume that's what I was talking about? Perhaps for the political purposes, but why would you assume a Republican, when they say this, are talking about run-of-the-mill trans people? See, that's the weird thing to me. It says there must be something in their minds, because certainly when it comes to people on the right, they don't assume, sorry for using your name so often, Blair White, in this context, but conservatives aren't coming out and being like, we also include Blair White in this? No, they're not talking about trans people. They're talking about groomers specifically, because there are certainly trans conservatives, notably Blair White, and the right isn't referring to people like Blair. You see, it's weird, isn't it? Here's the story from timcast.com. On Thursday, the U.S. Department of Justice sent a letter reminding all states that there are federal constitutional and statutory provisions to safeguard transgender youth against discrimination and withholding gender-affirming care. The letter, addressed to all U.S. state attorneys, was issued by Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clark for the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division. Clark reinforced federal non-discrimination rights afforded to transgender children in the U.S. Quote, the DOJ is committed to ensuring that transgender youth, like all youth, are treated fairly and with dignity in accordance with federal law. This includes ensuring that such youth are not subjected to unlawful discrimination based on their gender identity, including when seeking gender-affirming care. Minors. This is where things get interesting. It's easy to exploit the mindset of a minor. We see it across the board, and I'll show you some examples of ways I can explain this. There are certain things that we tolerate and don't tolerate in terms of personal behavior, in terms of self-identity. Now, for the most part, I am a bit of I'm civil libertarian, meaning not like big L libertarianism. I'm just like, do your thing, man. Leave me out of it. So if there's somebody who wants to be a banana, I don't really care if they want to be a banana. They can go around juggling bananas. That's fine. But if there are people who want to be a banana, they're going to have a hard time going to work. This is why I've brought this up over the past 4 years as it pertains to New York's gender identity laws. Because the gender identity law in New York is self-expression. That's literally how it's defined, your self-expression, which means, well, shouldn't there be then a right to identify as banana gender? You think I'm joking, and I'm not trying to be silly or facetious. I'm being 100% serious. New York City, last time I counted, recognized 31 genders officially. Some of them seem to be redundant, like male to female is considered a gender under New York law, but so is MTF, which basically means the same thing. Androgen or androgynous, so there's some repetition there. But ultimately, these 31 genders don't matter in the grand scheme of the law because the law says your self-expression is your gender identity. The question that I then proposed to several civil rights lawyers as I was exploring this was, what if someone claimed, to be Vociferon, Herald of the Winter Mists, that was their name, and they dressed up like a wolf? I was told by civil rights lawyers that you'd be laughed out of the courtroom, which is fascinating. I know you may have heard me tell this story before, but in the context of this, I think it matters. So imagine someone gets a job at Starbucks in New York City. They get hired, and then the next day they show up in a furry costume of a white tiger of some sort. And they say, from now on, you must call me Vociferon. The boss says, you can't wear that here. This is ridiculous. And no, we're not calling you Vociferon. They then pull up New York City human rights law, which specifically says you cannot discriminate on the basis of someone's name, clothing, or gender identity. And identity is defined as self-expression. Quite literally, it is. Could then the Starbucks manager fire this person? I was told they could. I called a couple different civil rights firms and they said, yeah, you can't do that. And I said, but why? Why is it that what's the difference? And I understand there's going to be an argument here, but hold on. From a logical and base perspective, what's the difference between one set of clothing and another? What's the difference between someone who wants to wear a dress and someone who wants to wear, maybe cat ears and a big tail? What's the difference? Well, I was told it wouldn't pass the laugh test. And I'm not kidding. That's what I was told. That if you go to court and you tell a judge, I am Vociferon, and under the law, I have a right to wear this clothing, use this name, it doesn't need to match my ID, they can't deny me. I was told the judge would laugh you out of the courtroom. And then I said, what's to stop a judge from laughing at a trans person? And they went, oh, well, I mean, we understand transgender. And I was like, no, not everybody does. What if there's an old fogey judge and he sees a 6'5", broad-shouldered, 250-pound lean muscle male walk in wearing a dress saying, my name is Susan. And the judge starts laughing and says, get in my courtroom. Would you accept that under this law? And they were like, well, the law is designed to protect these people. And then I said, look, when they passed a ban on public drinking, there was a quote from a New York politician saying, this law would never be construed to say that a construction worker couldn't enjoy a beer with his lunch. And sure enough, now it does. If the law is defined as these things, then certainly it does protect furries or anyone else who wants to cosplay or identify any way they want. No, but I was told over and over again by several lawyers, the judge will laugh at you. It's not going to pass the laugh test. And I'm just confused by that. That the judge has the discretion to laugh about one thing but not the other? And therein lies the big question about what we're really seeing and what it means to be prepubescent and have certain ideas about gender or identity. I think this is my personal hypothesis. Furries, for instance. Now, not every furry has the same drive as to why they want to wear a fursuit. We've had people comment on Timcast IRL saying that it's about having fun and escapism. Some have said it's about a fetish. Well, I don't know. I don't, I'm not going to pretend to fully understand what furries do or why they do it, other than to say that there are some people who legitimately identify this way. Why would they be denied their rights to wear the clothes they want, use the name they want, and identify the way they want? If gender is a social construct and dress and pants are completely meaningless as to what it means to be male or female or a man or a woman, then why could not you say any clothes? Any clothes at all? Now, the reason I bring this up is, where does a furry come from? How does this identity instill in someone? I believe it's youthful indoctrination. Not unintentional, however. You'll notice that most furries, I'm assuming, to be completely honest, but in media that we've seen, they don't dress up like animals. They dress up like cartoon animals. You don't see them, wearing like a legitimate wolf head from like taxidermy. No, they're wearing a cartoon wolf head with big cartoon eyes. They look like Bugs Bunny. My hypothesis on this is that when kids are young, if their parents just put them in front of a TV to watch Looney Tunes or other cartoon shows like this with anthropomorphized animals, then you'll end up with people who start to identify with those anthropomorphized animals. They then grow up and they want to express themselves like that. It's true in a lot of ways, and I'll give you a hard example. Take a look at this. Now, truth be told, I know some of this stuff on TikTok is just cosplay and people are trying to emulate animation, but there is this huge trend for years of people acting like cartoons. So I'm not going to play the audio. I mean, maybe I should, but I'm not, for, whatever. But for those that are listening, or those that are watching, you can see they do this weird bouncing movement that doesn't exist in human behavior. So it's so weird and cringe-inducing. Okay, you've watched a Pixar film. In Pixar movies, the characters bounce as they talk. They do this weird hand motion and they like rock their bodies and their heads bounce and they move back and forth. And I don't know where that comes from or why they do it. Certainly humans have expression. As I've been talking, I've been moving and I've been using my hands, but I've not been doing this flowy, bouncy side mouth thing where I'm talking like a cartoon character. I don't understand where that even comes from, where someone decided that we're going to animate a person and we're going to make them bounce around and flail their arms like crazy. But they did. You now have a bunch of people on TikTok doing these gestures. Now, this is a viral post from, I don't know, Is She Even Human? And you can see there's this young woman who does this stuff where she acts like she's Wreck-It Ralph. She really does look like one of these weird characters. It's Uncanny Valley. Are you familiar with what Uncanny Valley is? It's where animation gets close enough to being human, but not quite, so it makes you like uneasy. The interesting thing about this is that, well, as I stated, young people are physically emulating Pixar characters. They're behaving this way. Now, again, I think this woman is doing a performance, obviously, but there's been an emergence of people who are actually doing it unironically, seriously. What I think is kids, just like with furries, are going to grow up and they're going to be seeing this kind of behavior and they're going to start emulating it and talking this way. Seriously. There's like a video of some guy and he's talking about normal life stuff. He's not doing a performance. Obviously, in this one, this woman who's doing the weird animation bouncing, like character movement, she's singing. And the other one is doing a cosplay, so she's pretending to be an anime character. So, okay, I understand that. But there was one I was watching where a guy was talking about how his girlfriend broke up with him. And he's like, I can't believe it. She broke up with me. And I'm like, what are you doing, guy? Yeah, people watch these shows and it embeds themselves in their personal identity. If you're spending too much time online or in a fake world, you start to adopt these behaviors. But the easiest way to probably understand this, in my opinion, is if you've ever spent time in the UK or in a foreign country and you just naturally start picking up language or certain inflections in the way you speak and you don't even realize it. So I'm from Chicago, as most of you know. When I lived in Chicago, we all had a remnant of the Chicago accent. And that is, you don't say ah, you say yeah. Yeah, I didn't even notice. And it probably still comes out sometimes. But over time, you lose it, especially, I'm living in New York. People would say, I would say e-apple. And then people would point it out to me and I wouldn't even realize I said, yeah, can I get an e-apple? And they'd be like, yeah, like, well, I'm doing a little bit harsher than even people in Chicago would. But with the rise of the internet and non-regional diction from television, our speech patterns have sort of unified, and we speak very similarly to each other now. There used to be much stronger regional dialects: the Southern accent, the Boston accent. What is it? What is Massachusetts? Car. Gonna go for a ride in a car, Massachusetts or whatever. And you got don't ya know and donut out in the Midwest. But these things are all starting to go away. But those things still existed, and you didn't even realize you were doing it. So I'm in Chicago, and I watch movies, and I hear them speaking, but I still had elements of the Chicago accent, as most people did, and we didn't know we did. We couldn't hear it in our own voices. Well, I think in the past 10 years or so, it's really gone away. And you don't say garage door opener in Chicago anymore, and nobody really talks like that. Not like anyone in my neighborhood ever actually did, because we grew up with non-regional diction for the most part. Internet was becoming prominent, and movies and things like that. But here's my point. You don't realize you're picking up these speech patterns. Now imagine you're a kid and you grow up around a bunch of people from Chicago, and they're talking like this. The last remnant of Chicago where they still have that accent, don't you know? And the beers and garage door openers. The kids are going to grow up speaking like that. That's reality to them, and that's how they should speak. So when these kids are put in front of a TV where they see nothing but bobbing cartoon characters, they're going to start talking like this and flailing their arms and doing weird things. And they are. And that's what the reason I bring that up is to talk about the issue of grooming and what's happening with the indoctrination of kids into certain ideologies. You can teach children to be basically anything. They'll believe you because they're sponges that absorb information and are trying to figure out how to live in this world. If you put a child in an adult working environment, then they will quickly adopt adult working environment behaviors and probably be more successful in life. I attribute much of my success to the fact that I was homeschooled early on, before kindergarten. And when I was about 9 through 12 years old, my family owned a cafe on the north side of Chicago. And so I was working there, and I wasn't exposed to a bunch of kids saying dumb things or cartoon animals. I was exposed to adults. So the behaviors that I was adopting were working class adults. Thus, I'm in 6th grade with a wad of cash from working my job, and I'm hearing people talk about the Democrats and the Republicans and policy. I wasn't hearing people talk about Power Rangers. I mean, sometimes, but it was a lot of adult behavior stuff. And what I mean by that is mature things, such as how to file taxes and who's running for office and why. That embedded in me, and my young brain was like, this is what makes you an adult functioning member of society. Well, now we have this weird isolation period where kids are being kept away from their parents and put in indoctrination centers where they're told very strange and specific things, and they begin to adopt these behaviors. Which brings me to Josh Dawes' Twitter thread. He says, I'm seeing a lot of people on the right share this meme. While it may be a strong satirical response to those who get lost in nuance, it fundamentally fails to recognize why the left wants to talk to your kids about sexuality. Let's connect some dots. And someone tweeted, it's not rocket science, guys. They're just evil and want to diddle kids. It is overly simplistic. Josh says, the left doesn't want to diddle kids. They want to create little revolutionaries. To do that, they need to sever the bond between students and the parents they believe are raising their children to be hateful bigots. I don't think it's conscious, to be completely honest. I think you just have teachers of an ideology, a cult like religion, and they do these things second nature. He says, in order to sever the bond between parents and their children, the left is using a two-pronged approach. Critical race theory and radical gender ideology, properly known as queer theory, are not two unrelated sets of ideas. They are two parts of the same strategy. Critical race theory is usually the first set of ideas to be introduced. This is often enough to radicalize racial minorities, but is merely step one for white or white-adjacent students. CRT instills in these students a negative self-identity, as they're taught to believe they're recipients of enormous privilege that was stolen from others, and they are complicit in historic and ongoing injustice. In child terms, they're taught to believe they're bad. Apart from the shame and guilt, this also gives them a worldview at odds with one their parents grew up with and are trying to pass on to their kids. Once CRT is done tearing down the kids and leaving them with negative self-identity, queer theory is introduced and offer them a wide assortment of positive self-identities to choose from. Instead of living with the shame and guilt of being a member of the oppressive dominant culture, students can be celebrated for coming out as gender non-binary or pan. In an instant, these kids can trade their negative self-identity and all the accompanying guilt and shame of being an oppressor for a positive self-identity and as a much venerated oppressed minority. There are similarities here to some religions. You're told that you harbor some guilt or shame and that you can be absolved of this by, making penance or doing something like that. Many religions have something akin to this. What I think is, many of these radical types recognized the function of religion and how people became to be religious, and said we need to quantify these things, atomize it, and then execute it. So the idea is they look at how people who are religious are told you have inherent guilt or original sin, and then you can be given an opportunity, and they say we can do that. We can do that. And so you have white privilege as original sin. You have your ability to make penance, to recognize your internalized misogyny or whatever, and become a better person. Here's where we end up. Like I was mentioning with the weird bouncy behaviors of kids, they'll absorb whatever it is you tell them for the most part and begin acting this way if they see it emulated back at them. If they see a teacher who behaves a certain way, it's not just about learning math. Teachers teach kids social behaviors. Kids are looking at teachers and seeing how they behave. Now, typically kids are looking at each other and learning from each other, which is a huge problem, mind you. Yeah, we replaced kids learning from adults with kids learning from kids, and it's been disastrous in my opinion. But when it comes to these teachers, they see the social behaviors and they begin to emulate. Now, Josh gets into the interesting part. Once the parents find out about what's happening to their kids, it's too late. There is now an adversarial relationship between the child and the parents. He says it takes extraordinarily deft parenting to repair the relationship. And I have conservatives come in my house to come on Timcast IRL say, my kids are about to go to college. And I'm like, are you nuts? Have you been paying attention to what you've been saying? That to me is crazy. But yeah, I read a story about somebody who said that their kid their daughter had become depressed. One day dyed her hair, shaved side of her head, started complaining about being in the wrong body. And so what they did was they immediately quit their job. How about that? And they weren't a wealthy individual. Went to the school and said, thank you so much for all the help you've been giving our child. We're changing jobs, so we're going to be moving to a new town. And they went, oh, okay. There's nothing the school can do about that. We're just moving for a new job. It's a normal thing that happens. They moved to the countryside, to a suburban area, to a suburban rural area. And they took their kids out of the school, started homeschooling them. And then within a few weeks, they were no longer depressed. They let their hair grow back out, started doing normal kid stuff. And they were like, that's how you got to do it. Because if you go to the school and say, what you're doing to my kid is wrong, the school says you're abusing your child, and now we're bringing the state in. And that's where Joe Biden steps in. Joe Biden says, to parents of transgender children, affirming your child's identity is one of the most powerful things you can do to keep them safe and healthy. Look, I think some kids do have dysphoria. I think some kids do have body dysmorphia. I think some kids actually can be gay. There are certain kids that have, certain behaviors or certain developmental issues or certain developmental traits. And, people can make predictions or assumptions, but it is a very, very small minority of children. So if your child comes to you and says they think, they really wish they were a dragon or something, perhaps they're consuming too much dragon content stuff. I don't know. Maybe they need to spend most of their time absorbing the real world and going out and foraging or camping, spend more time around people and develop an identity around other humans. Too much fictional content, too many video games, it can have strange effects on people, and I think it is. For Joe Biden to say this is interesting because Sweden doesn't do this. Sweden actually gives psychiatric and psychosocial services, as brought up by Colin Wright. The point being, there's disparate views on what should or shouldn't be. I'm curious as to why it is that there's not, for kids who are furries, we don't have furry affirming care. I don't care if you're trans or a furry. You're allowed to do what you want to do. I'm just saying, where is Joe Biden to come out and say if your kid wants to be Vociferon, Herald of the Winter Mists, you should affirm that? What if your kid comes out and says they want to be a Demogorgon monster, and so they want, body modification? What if a young girl says she wants to identify as Pamela Anderson in the mid-90s and she wants implants? You'd say no to that. But why? It's a sexual identity issue. What's the difference? Serious question. What's the difference? If a 12-year-old boy says he wants implants, are they going to say yes or no? Your parents are probably going to say no to it. But what's the difference? Body modification for someone to self-express. In the end, when Joe Biden and the Justice Department come out and say this, I need only say one thing. If the left wants whatever they want, fine, whatever. This country is being split in two, and there's going to come a point where the right says absolutely not. And we're getting dangerously close to that. The left and the right are already at odds with each other. The left is advocating for teachers to have conversations about sexual issues with children in secret. I mean, to me, that's crazy. But they're adamant about pursuing this. Will parents in this country say no? I think the overwhelming majority of parents reject that, but will they stand up? I suppose we'll see. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.